Okay. Okay. I think.
Okay, are we
Woohoo!
like going?
Yeah, we are.
So slay. Hello everyone. Hello everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to the long-awaited, much-anticipated episode
Reboot.
18 of the Slay House Review.
18.
I believe it. I'm pretty sure it's
Crazy.
18. Yeah, you know what? We missed a couple of fucking stories, and you know what? That's not my fault. That is Devin's fault fully.
And you know what? I just think
You know
it's
what?
totally fine.
She has no apologies. She has no
Yeah, I was gonna
regrets.
say,
You know what? She's living her fucking life. And if you guys miss out on a couple of podcast episodes, like, I'm sorry, but sometimes a woman just needs to be a woman and get her womanly business
Yeah, I
all
have a lot of
settled.
womanly business.
And you know what? And you know, she does not live to appease the gaze of the audience, the male
Take note.
gaze, the gay
Take note.
gaze. Like, she has to live
Either
her
gaze.
own autonomous, womanly, soft butch life.
Exactly. And that is exactly what I've been doing. And I will be answering no questions and I will be minding my business.
Yeah,
and hope
no
everyone does the
questions.
same.
We're at this time, we're not taking any questions. We're simply here to talk at you for 45 minutes, 40 to 45 minutes, depending on whether or not this laptop dies before we are able to.
Could happen.
Is certainly a possibility. Speaking of which, I'm just taking note of the time. It is 11:14.
We also, you know, could always just go rogue and rip the microphone thing out and throw the charger back in and then
just
mine the rest. Because, you know, that's basically what happened last time.
Yeah,
So.
and you know what? I personally didn't see any complaints because we didn't get any comments on the last YouTube video.
Plus,
and
I haven't even looked.
Yeah, exactly. And like, you know, through the perspective of manifestation, you know, it's always like that whole "a watched pot never boils" rule, where it's just like, you know, when you just sort of leave something there, like the universe takes care of it. And so it's like we are just taking our own spiritual responsibility by just like completely disregarding this product whenever we throw it anywhere.
I completely agree.
Thank you so much. You're so totally stoned. Agree. It's so funny. I'm just like looking into your like vacant eyes. I'm like, oh my god, she's
just like been so traumatized today that I feel like I can't formulate a thought. But you know what? Actually, no, because I'm gonna be cooking. It's like a small fire. We're starting.
Oh, you feel a sort of something.
And you know, I do have a question for you.
Okay.
Which is that like I've always been told that my voice is really like heinous and like grating.
I actually
and,
like your
really
voice.
Annoying. Thank you, because
I'm not just saying that as your bestie.
Thank you, but I do also think like doing stuff like this and like in general reading more, like I actually am more conscious of like the way that I'm. Like I don't actually have a very high voice. It's just that when I get like anxious,
no, not at all. Yeah, you know,
I get really like
up.
I carry it in my shoulders, so I get like this, and then the voice gets higher. But you know, I actually think like I would have a good voice for audiobooks. So I'm wondering if at some point during this discussion, when we hit a lull, you're willing to let me
can
try
perhaps
out like just
workshop.
a passage.
Yeah, no.
So I think we should start. And
I will
talk
gladly
about this.
create the space for you. I just want to interject
Hold space.
very quickly that I was going to make a joke about you asking about whether or not your pussy stank, but I can't remember the exact phrasing that you started off this line of questioning with. Like, I don't know, you're like, I wanted to ask you about I wanted to say like your stinky pussy, but I was personally working on my own bad habits and allowing you to speak without interrupting you and giving you your womanly space.
I felt seen and heard.
And I certainly heard you.
Cared for.
I heard you and I smelled you to answer my own question.
Yeah, right.
I will say, like, Bible, 100% genuine. I've never, in my 2.5 years of knowing you now, I've never once, like, smelled your pussy, like just like
slay.
like you being just like around me like a stinky. I've never once. And I will say, you know, perhaps the listener is thinking to themselves like, what an ignorant thing for this gay man to say, that like women just walk around with like stinky pussies that you can smell through their clothes. No. I have been in situations where I definitely could smell.
And you're like, that's
I can think of 2 separate people at 2 different points in my life where I could smell their vaginas through their clothes. And I will say one of those instances was in high school. And yes, we did you know, talk behind this girl's back about how smelly her pussy was.
That's
It
really
was a
tragic.
topic of discussion amongst my friend group.
She's so
And
fucked up for that
the
forever.
second, well, she was already kind of like, mentally not all there. So it's like, I'm sure us talking about her smelly pussy was not exactly exacerbating
You didn't
the
break
situation.
the camel's back.
Yeah. And the second situation, which was, when I was sort of like late teens, early 20s, it was one of my ex-boyfriends is right now, and it's right beside me. It was one of my ex-boyfriends, like friends in their friend group. And I will say for that situation as well, everybody else did constantly talk about this woman behind her back about how she left a snail trail with her stinky.
Somebody should tell her.
Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I mean, I don't know what my ex-boyfriend and his like lesbian friend group, what they're up to. But I will say, and this is maybe something that you can confirm or deny or interject your personal experience, given that you are a embodied sapphic woman. I feel like there was a thing in the like mid 2010s of like lesbians just had like bad personal hygiene, like kind of like stoner lesbians that had bad personal hygiene, and they were kind of like smelly and gross looking.
One thing that sort of comes to mind, and I don't think like writ large there's any, like, at least in my experience, like notable period of like bad pussy hygiene, but I will say there is something about the kind of pants that one is wearing
as a lesbian in the mid 2010s.
I mean, skinny jeans were, but it's also, it's not just like, this is just an all around thing, I think. It's like, you know how like you need like pants and like underwear that like allows breathing space. I do think like probably, and I don't know, I would like to see some data. So if anyone has ever crunched
like
the numbers,
any such sort of like academic study, if
like,
this is your area of expertise, please actually chime in.
I think like perhaps in the 80s, and I would see like a cyclical kind of resurgence in the early 2010s, like just super tight, like polyester, non-breathable clothing, thrifted, and or like that kind of stuff. It just doesn't let your
the
breathe.
pH balance, perhaps.
And girl, I have been there. Like, I'm thankful no one has like noticed,
ever said
but
anything.
like, we've all had our pH imbalance situations. Everybody's got them, and I will throw it out there. Boric acid tablets. They're
just like rub it on your pussy.
No, you just shove a little capsule up. This is like
it's like a what do you call it?
This is like a
what's
really
it called? A
suppository.
Suppository. Thank you so much.
That
has to be one of my favorite words in the English language. A suppository, like such a like sterile sort of like 1950s sort of funny word for like a pill that you shove up your pussy.
It's going
like my suppository.
Right.
Perfect word, which perfectly captures what it is.
It's actually such a moment. But I will say, and this is real, and I do think that like, if anything, listeners should know this. If you ever are like, hey, something's not right, I think your first step should be, and I'm not a doctor, not medical advice, but looking into boric acid suppositories.
Do Amazon. Your own research.
This is one of the best. Literally do your own research, but this is one of the most like highest rated Amazon products. And if you read through the reviews, some life-changing comments from women that I've screenshotted over the years because they're just so fantastic. So do your own research, obviously, but I think the first step should be looking into it if you don't know.
Oh my god.
Anyways,
two things.
So for all of your lesbian listeners, which is not even lesbian listeners, it's for anybody.
Just like people
with a badge, but like
embodied humans who happen to have vaginal genitalia.
Right. Exactly.
Sorry, I've just gone through like hours and hours of HR training courses on the internet, so I'm just trying to be as aware as possible.
Thank
you.
The
inclusivity of my own personal language.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Two things I wanted to interject based off of this conversation. One, I found myself doing this specific gesture, and all throughout this weekend, me and Lucas, like, we kept doing this and kept catching like civilians also doing this, and we'd be like, why are you so like Bjork debut right now?
Oh, slay.
The cover of Bjork's debut. Yeah.
That's
okay, and number two, another thing that happened this weekend, Lucas was sort of like non-sexually like toying with my like flappy ball sack, because I don't know if you guys can notice my current voice. I was pretty sick over the weekend, so
Some sexy baby.
some old wives' tale for you. When you are a man and you are getting sick, like your balls do drop, your testicles become really
So
floppy
lymph
because
nodes
they're
or
trying
whatever.
to regulate the temperature. Since your body temperature is high, like your testicles, like
Oh,
sort of detach from your body and sag to like remain
crazy.
cool to make sure that your semen doesn't get cooked. I have a very vivid memory of my dad like saying that to me as a child, like, "Oh, you can tell you're getting sick because your balloons are sagging." And I've kept that,
Girl.
moving forward. But anyways, he was kind of like playing around with my like flappy ball sack as I was like sick, and then he like smelled his fingers and he was like, I'm detecting a sort of like fishy sort of smell. And I was like,
Ew.
and it's like truly like as a
Probably just
man,
sweaty.
even like, and I'm sure I think I had showered the night before. It's like I can't even predict whether or not my circumcised cock, because this is, as someone who, to invoke my ex-boyfriend again, he was uncut, and there were many times when it was just like, smelling kind of like shrimp cocktail down there. But as someone who's circumcised, who should not be, as long as I'm washing, shouldn't have that problem. I even feel like I can't control and like predict whether or not like there will be some sort of like smell there. And I always feel very just like dirty and sort of like gross, as if it's like a moral failing that I have a fishy smelling like underside of my like penis.
It actually is really like terrifying to think that you're like unaware of
Yeah,
it
unless you like
happening, or
really
like
kind of like dig in
right,
there and
exactly.
smell.
And it's like, oh God, like
There's an Instagram
awful.
reel going around right now. I'm sure it's going around on TikTok as well, where it's like this older British woman is like in a car and she goes, "Before you come for me," or like something like that. And she goes, "Stick your finger, stick your finger down your pants, scratch your minge, and smell your finger, because you have bigger fish to fry." So, stinky, smelly pussies are
Ew.
certainly in the cultural mind right now.
Yeah.
And that's perhaps why I opened asking that question, not because I am just like an insensitive, misogynistic, woman hating gay man. Anyways, why don't we transition? Are you trans? So this week we are discussing the story Autobahn by Hugo Hamilton, who once again is a British author. If there is one thing that Deborah Treisman and what did I say?
British.
I'm totally meant to say Irish. I'm so sorry, because this next statement hinges on the fact that I established that this man is Irish. If there's one thing that Deborah Treisman and the editorial board of the New Yorker's fiction department has a hard on for this past year, it's Irish authors.
Absolutely.
Irish fiction is certainly having a moment. And you know what? I'm glad we are recording this, because when I first read this story, this is the first thing that popped into my mind that I wanted to say in the podcast was, hot take alert. Even though it's having like a moment right now, I think Irish fiction kind of sucks. I think Irish fiction is kind of overrated. I think Irish writers are doing things that were kind of done 10 years ago and are continuing this sort of like overly earnest, sort of looser, sort of ambiance based fiction that I think is just rapidly going out of style. And just because they're all from Ireland and it kind of sounds cool to be like, oh, this like great working
I think it's because it's like
cohort of
moody.
Irish authors. Yeah, moody. Like, and it's just like, it's not good. Sorry. I don't think it's great.
You hit the nail on the head when
Thank
you
you so
said
much.
that it's very 10 years ago, because
Yeah,
it definitely
very
is.
10 years ago.
But it's just like the sort of, I feel like the, I don't know, Irish ethos of it is like the sort of moodiness, the like fogginess of it, and it's sort of like
they certainly sell a fantasy. Like they're from Ireland.
Right.
People have a certain cultural image of Ireland in their head, and these Irish writers, I feel like, certainly play into that.
Yeah, or they in some ways play into it, in some ways like subvert it in a way that feels like, okay, you're at least always aware of the sort of
Irishness, the Irish origin of this, whether or not you know for sure whether the writer is Irish.
Americans, for better or worse, seem to, it's just like, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
Don't think about that.
I do have to take like an obligatory photo of my arms.
Do it.
But that being said, I wanted to just then say, I don't think that this story was as egregious as the Sally Rooney. And I
Oh,
do
not at
think I
all.
would say it's similarly stacked as the Roddy Doyle. And frankly, I feel like, I mean, you kind of
Yeah,
liked this story,
yeah.
didn't you?
I thought it was like good. I thought it
Yeah.
was like interesting. I sort of like already don't quite. I thought okay, I thought there were two very strong observational points that this story hinged on to continue that metaphor that you used earlier. I think the first is this sort of like uh the the fact okay this requires a little bit of plot recap, so I guess I'll
Yeah, so
do
let's,
the
yeah, go into it,
obligatory
bestie.
plot recap. Okay, so this story is quite short. It's told in first person,
And you know what, I will say it does have that going for it. It is a short story. It
and
does not take up more
I
space than
do,
it needed to.
and
Good for
God,
you,
I mean,
Hugo. Thank you.
I will say something smart about this is that like sometimes when people write really short fiction, they try to cram too long of a timeline into too short of a piece.
Hmm.
the the place that short fiction shines is when it illustrates a specific moment that has a sort of demarcated beginning and end.
Yeah.
What happens in this story is a man who we later learn to find out is half German, half Irish, is driving on the Autobahn in the 70s, the Autobahn in Germany, and he's pulled over by I guess like an East German official, like police officer or something, who is like suspicious of him because the narrator seems slightly odd. The police
And
officer
he looks like a terrorist.
thinks that he's, yeah, like part of this like terrorist, like leftist, whatever, something
Yeah.
organization, and basically holds him at gunpoint into the woods where, it seems clear that obviously we know the narrator's not going to get shot, but it seems like, okay, he's like pretty much going to get executed in the woods in this random part of Germany. And so, in order to basically prove that he's not a spy and he is, in fact, just this random guy whose mom
Yeah.
is from Germany, despite him being Irish, um, he tells the officer that he's a musician, which I think is
He's
also
like in a
true,
band, yeah.
perhaps. Oh, yes, because he's like in a band. And the police officer is like, okay, can you
Yeah,
prove it
play
as
your
a
like, because what's on him at the time of getting like interrogated and patted down by this officer?
harmonica
He has a mouth
mouth harp?
harmonica, which then is then further extrapolated as like an anchor point for him to explore memories of his father, because his father had gifted him this mouth
Right.
harmonica. And so basically he gets out of the police interrogation by like playing this
For his
mouth
life,
harmonica,
like
yeah, and
whatever.
like proving that he is like a musician and not like a terrorist. And throughout all of this, we're getting flashes of like him exploring his like trauma with his father, because this like overbearing, like violent cop like reminds him of his like abusive dad. You know, all these things. And like he also has like a kid now,
Right.
and he's like, you know,
What I thought was most well observed about this piece was like one, that sort of like panic that you sort of revert to like some
I
early
agree.
early thing that you know, or like this like I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you're like really fucked up or like really stoned and you like look at your phone and the only thing you can think of is like your home phone number from when you were like a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Is like all the numbers go away except for like just like really early shit. I thought that was really well rendered. And the second thing that I thought was well observed was the fact that the other memory that comes up is super interesting. It's like it leaves school early as a kid, the narrator,
Yeah, yeah.
and he bumps into his dad like at the corner store, at the grocery store or something, and he's like buying a sandwich. But his dad doesn't see him or like make note of him because he
Yeah.
doesn't think that his kid would be like out of school at this time. So the kid has this, earlier version of the narrator has this really sort of like memorable experience where he's like seeing his dad from almost this like objective, like what does
Yeah.
my dad look like to a stranger kind
And the
of moment.
fact that like his dad doesn't notice that he's there, or if he
Right.
does notice that he's there, he didn't like say hi.
Right.
And that the narrator as a child did not feel comfortable enough or compelled enough to like say like, dad, hi, oh my gosh, funny
Yeah.
meeting you here, because his dad like beats him up, and he's like,
Right.
you know, he's got like a weird complicated relationship with his father.
Right.
I
So he
will
just sort of
say,
like takes it all in.
to piggyback off of what you're saying, oh my god, it's almost like we're in a seminar.
I
To
know.
piggyback off of what you're saying, I definitely agreed that that was probably like the strongest. It's always like I'll watch myself in the screen and I'll see like, oh, my arm looks good, and then I'll try to take a picture and it like just doesn't look good on my phone.
I think it looks great though.
Oh my gosh, you're too sweet to me, bestie.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely.
But anyways, to continue what I was saying, yeah, there is something very realistic about like, okay, you're like suddenly confronted with this life or death situation and you're being interrogated.
Right.
And even though you know that you're not a terrorist in this situation, for some reason you feel guilty just because you are being interrogated, and you start questioning like, well, who am I? Am I doing something that makes me deserve this interrogation? Even though you know, like, you're just like a dude minding his business. That rang true really for me, and I thought it was also a convenient way to then explore this narrator and by extension the author, because I mean, and we can get into this, but in the interview, basically, again, this is yet another New Yorker fiction piece where it's just a thinly veiled like personal essay with
Literally.
like the light,
and
like,
he like makes a point to say that in the interview,
that like like this was a real thing that happened to him, and it's like, okay, but then why is this like the fiction story? Why is this what is? And it's like every New Yorker story is fucking
why
like
did
this.
we
But
choose
anyways,
to do this and then we in the same breath shit on autofiction?
but I do think that him being interrogated and now questioning like, well, am I, is there something wrong with me, was a very smart way to then leap into like him just having this like nothing identity, because like he grew up in Dublin but his mother was German, they spoke German in the house, and so like he's in Germany now but it's not his homeland because he didn't grow up there, but he speaks fluent German. And even though he grew up in Dublin, which is his father's homeland, he doesn't like feel a connection to it because his dad was like this like abusive, scary man. And like, so I thought like, okay, this is actually pretty good framing for the thematic stuff that he wanted to explore.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And wait, what was the second fucking thing you said that I also wanted to like
it
echo?
was that moment of like seeing your parent like from an objective, like,
oh yeah, and that was also very well done, and probably I would say the most compelling part. I will say, like, when I first read this piece, for the first time and I sat down, I really was kind of like by it. But like upon my second reading, I do appreciate what he's doing, and I appreciate the brevity with which he was able to do so. Is this something I find like super compelling? No, but from a technical standpoint, I can certainly say, yeah, this is a competently written piece of fiction.
Well, I will say that like by the third paragraph, I was sort of like, this is the New Yorker. I was like, almost like, sometimes when I like read a New Yorker piece, I'll be like, oh wow, I'm like so into this story that I don't actually like sort of stop and have like a bigger picture moment, like what am I doing right now, this sort of like self-reflective mode. But then I was like, third paragraph, I was like, oh yeah, I'm sitting here on my couch reading the New Yorker.
Yes.
Like, which is something so funny because it's just so like inauthentic, but like branded across all like fucking fiction that I'm like, what is it?
It really is.
It's just that ode to New Yorker. It's like,
yeah, like this.
Oh, reeks of Deborah Treisman.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, Deborah Treisman or her underlings certainly did
Snail
pick this
trail
out of
New Yorker.
Exactly.
Like,
the pussy smell of Deborah Treisman is all over this piece. And I will say, this is what I was trying to get at. Thank you for saying this, because now I remember actually what I wanted to say was, when I first sat down and read this, I really did kind of think like a couple paragraphs in, like, oh my God, is he going to get beat up by this cop, or is he going to get shot? And then, yes, I remembered very quickly, like, no, this is the New Yorker. He is certainly going to be fine. Like, this is gonna sort of just, it's gonna be like, and this is how all of these pieces go. Like, the general narrative structure is like, they set up this situation where perhaps there is like this big moment of tension that could happen, a big climax, but it doesn't happen. And that's supposed to be like that's supposed to be the payoff of the stories. It's like leading you up to this. You really think like, oh, this could really, really go wrong, but then it doesn't, and everything's fine. And like that's what. And it's like, sure, if I was reading this as a one-off, as someone who like does not read the fiction in the New Yorker every single week, it's like, sure, I'm sure I would find that satisfying. But this is very much a New Yorker story trope, and I'm like, okay, once again, yeah, exactly. It's like, why can't to just say what we always say, like, just put your pussy into it for like 1 second.
Like, because it doesn't.
Like, for 1 week, just put your pussy into it.
I guess more, in some ways, you could make the argument that it's like more like real life, and that like big shit doesn't always happen, or you're like anxious about things that don't always happen. But they're not even exploring that idea in any interesting way. It's like, oh, let's just like set up this like plot thing that doesn't pay off to to
It's
gotcha
almost a
the
little
reader. It's like
cheap.
it's
Yeah,
like
it's
it's
like
just like, okay, like
it's
that's not
like
really earned. Like
yeah, exactly. You're trying to get us to feel a
it's a
certain
cheap
anxiety or a
shot.
certain suspense, but
Yeah.
then you're not actually like giving. I mean, you're getting blue balled.
Right.
Yeah,
Literally. This is like I am not having sex, so I'm reading
yeah,
the New Yorker to
exactly.
also not have like
The New
literary
Yorker,
sex.
the notorious publication of read by people who don't have sex, which
Exactly. I
yeah, all the
mean,
fiction in the New Yorker kind of reads that way. But I will say, just quick note, since we did miss a couple of stories, I want to say that the past like three that we didn't cover, or like two or so, I actually did really
you
like.
will have to actually check them out.
The Sigrid Nunez, I was very skeptical going into it because I fucking hated The Friend. That was one of the most like, I would
Mm-hmm.
say out of all the books I've read this year, that has to be one of the worst ones. Just like really overwrought. Just like really, I don't enjoy Sigrid
Right.
Nunez's sort of
That's
like
so interesting.
monologuing philosophical thing. Um, but like in this story, it actually kind of like had plot and characters, and I thought it was kind of
Mm-hmm.
well done and compelling.
Okay.
It was an ensemble piece. And then the Brian Washington being kind of the fag of the moment, like 2 or 3 years ago, kind of during the like post Emma Klein, post
Mm-hmm.
Atessa like moment
Yeah.
where the publishing world was like actively looking for like the next wonderkins of like literary fiction. Brian Washington was certainly a name that was very much in that conversation. And his story, and I went into it feeling hostile because I feel hostile towards any gay man of notoriety who writes fiction. And I was left feeling like, oh, okay, this is actually a pretty
I mean, and you
satisfying
can't ask
short
for any
story.
better than
Exactly.
that,
My
truly. Like,
expectations were proven to be wrong, and I was,
pleasantly
he
surprised, dare you
walked the
say?
walk. Brian Washington like Molly whopped me in our like ideological battlefield. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I will
You can
say,
check
like,
that out.
compared to the like stories that preceded this in the last like 2 weeks, I feel like there's another one I'm missing, but oh well, it is what it is. This is kind of a return to a lower point of like New Yorker story quality.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's anything as egregious as like,
The Sally Bruni.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
literally, exactly. But like, it was really run of the mill New
Yeah,
Yorker. I was sort of like, okay, cool. Like, I made it through very quickly. I didn't sort of like lose speed, but
exactly. It
it is
wasn't
what it
torturous
is.
to read. It was short for what it was. It accomplished what it was looking for. And I mean, it very much embodies the take a hit of your vape, move on with your life.
Exactly.
And you know what? From some of the shit that we've had to read over the past, like, however many weeks that we've been doing this now, like, this is a perfectly fine experience to have reading a New Yorker story.
Exactly.
I do want to read, so I was pulling up his Goodreads reviews for his, like, other books. And I
Slay.
thought this one for his, like, so Hugo Hamilton, this man is most famous for a memoir about, like, literally what the story is about, like, growing up in Dublin, but being, like, German and, like, and in real
Okay.
life, his dad was like overbearing and weird. And I guess his like memoir, his like widely acclaimed memoir from 2003 or something, is
Oh,
very much just about this
slay.
exact thing. And so I clicked the 1-star reviews to see like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, just to see how the
See
girls
what
were
we're
cutting
working
up
with.
11 years ago. And this woman, Alicia, said, awful, awful, and just beyond awful. And then this person, Alicia, goes on to say, like, this author has no consistency, no clear theme established in any chapter whatsoever. 1 minute in the same chapter, you are talking about the author's father, and then the next paragraph starts talking about his school friends, and the next one is about his mother's cakes. Then the next paragraph is about his love for painting. I find this extremely irritating. And I thought that was funny because he very much like does that in this
Yeah,
story. This is very
absolutely.
free
I could
associative.
absolutely see him doing that.
So you know what? Has certainly stuck to his guns all of
Good
these
for
years.
him.
And
Good for him for seeing that Goodreads review and being like, fuck it.
do you think this is a man who reads his Goodreads review?
No,
I don't think so. Yeah,
no,
I think
no.
all these old farts like couldn't give a fuck.
And good for them. I
Yeah,
mean, like, would love to have whatever some of their
yeah.
having is.
Certainly, like I would give this a 2 out of 5.
Yeah, I think I actually give it like a 2.5 out of 5. It was like,
Yeah,
okay, whatever.
I was like
It's like
fine.
fine. It's literally fine.
Whew, what time? 41. We started
Um,
at 14, so we've been going for like 30 minutes now.
so I can see the batteries like a
Like
little bit there. Oh, let me
yeah.
do my excerpt. You tell me, give me
Yes, yes.
some
Oh,
notes.
go ahead. Okay, I'm
I
like
gotta find a good
fully
spot.
intentionally listening. Take it away, Musty. I'm holding space. I'm holding space.
uh, the cop wanted to know why I spoke fluent German. My mother came from the Rhineland, and we went to live in Ireland, I said. We spoke German at home in Dublin. He didn't believe me. He clearly took me to be living under an assumed identity, the teddy bear part of a brilliant disguise. I was full of shit. Everybody was full of shit. It was a nervy time in Germany.
Okay, now
So
let
what do you
me
think?
try. Where were you starting?
The cop.
Okay, my turn. I'm gonna stutter through this because I'm like, off a couple of substances.
Do it. Absolutely. I'm gonna hit the bone.
Go, bestie, go. The cop wanted to know why I spoke fluent German. My mother came from the Rhineland and went to live in Ireland, I said. We spoke German at home in Dublin. He didn't believe me. He clearly took me to be living under an assumed identity, the teddy bear part of a brilliant disguise. I was full of shit. Everybody was full of shit. It was a nervy time in Germany.
Slay, bitch.
Thank you so much. I do have a background in theater. I perhaps feel like I was trying a little bit hard. And I mean, my main critique for you listening was that it was a little sort of one note.
Yeah.
But I have found with audiobooks and like listening to people reading their fiction, listening to the Writer's Voice podcast from the New Yorker, which I did not listen to this man read his story, full disclosure.
Yeah, me neither.
That is kind of the name of the game. I feel like when writers read their stories, they do sort of which I kind of understand. It's like you're letting the text do it, not like making yourself do it.
Right.
But I will say, like, I think he actually sounded pretty on that note, like writerly while reading.
Thank you.
So if like imagining that like you were like this is your story and you were like at like a reading and like everybody was anticipating you, like I would like definitely like be sitting there thinking like, oh, she like totally like wrote this. Like, she's like a writer.
Well, thank you. At the last reading, I was actually like told that I was like incredibly deadpan, like the entire time, like because I did sort of deliver like every line just like this like little hint of vocal fry. And I was like, okay, I think like,
and there is sort of like a writerly, like kind of intellectual, like earnestness in that again, because it's like I'm not a performer, I'm just a writer, and I'm here like just reading you my stuff, and I'm not gonna like put on anything because that's not what I do. I'm a writer first and foremost, and I think that like when people are like listening to writers reading their own work, like that is really gives them a kind of credibility. So I think perhaps you definitely win. Like you. You, as well as Brian Washington, have totally destroyed me in the intellectual arena, the aesthetic arena. You've just like beat the shit out of me in my egregious faggoty performance.
I don't really actually think at all that that's like true. I don't
I'm
think
totally
you're defeated,
just like kind of like, yeah.
I think that's slay. And
wait, is there anything else like? I mean, like, oh, I did want to say, like, this is so, like, Sylvia Plathcore, this whole thing, because it's just, like, my daddy, my daddy, my daddy.
It really is, like...
It's, like, I haven't really read a lot of, like, male fiction or male writing about, like, daddy issues. Like, that actually is something I personally haven't encountered about, like a story which basically boils down to, like, this man has daddy issues. So that is kind of novel.
I mean, yeah, absolutely.
Do you think it's gay for, like, a straight man to have daddy issues?
No, I think it's actually like as classic as like apple pie.
I guess that's true. I guess it's gayer to have mommy issues as a man.
But it's also like gayer to think of them as daddy issues.
That's true.
Does that make sense? Like, but I don't know. I'm into it.
Were you like reading this and thinking like, wow, this guy's like a fag? I kind of was at like some like not like literally, but like I was like, this is kind of like
my mind.
Not that he like literally was gay, but like oh, this is kind of like faggy because he was like. This colored every relationship with a man in my life. Like, because at one point he like talks about the cop and he says something like, I thought of my father, because I like every relationship I've had with a man, or maybe he said this in the interview, has been like colored by memories of my father. And I was like, no, it's kind of gay to me, King. Like,
I didn't even pick up on that, but like now that you say it, absolutely.
And you know what? To do the traditional Marco thing, perhaps this story actually would have been more effective if the cop with his gun pointed at our narrator, like pulled down his pants and was like, won't you, or in German, sorry, they're in Germany, why don't you suck in meinen Kocken? And then he was like, actually, I know that this situation would look like rape, but with his gun and his cock confronting me, I suddenly became deeply aroused and sucked this cop's penis and he spared my life. And because I was able to do this, I am no longer bothered by the abuse that my father subjected to me as a child.
Just totally flip it on its head.
Yeah.
In a really like hardcore porn way.
Yeah, and I think that would be the Marco way, like out of this situation.
At least the Marco way to pitch that as like a possible edit and just
if I was on the New Yorker editorial staff, I would say, were you perhaps considering, because there was a point in the interview, the last question, Deborah Treisman is like, I know this piece went through like multiple drafts, which Deborah Treisman, if you haven't noticed, says that about every fucking piece that she interviews. Like there's always a question about, this went through multiple revisions. But if I was in that situation, I would say, perhaps think about, the cop pulling down his pants and having your narrator suck off
I'm just
the cop.
spitballing here.
I'm just curious on how that would change the piece and how that would color the narrator's conclusions about his father. Something to consider.
Something to consider. Of course, as a writer, you can decide what to do from here.
Under through the lens of like online HR training, do you think that would be considered workplace harassment? No, it's all in the name of like artistic excellence.
I actually think
Thank you so much, bestie.
Totally could be, and also like anecdotally speaking, I've heard suggestions even less couth than that in workshop settings. So,
do you have anything else to say, bestie?
Founded. No, I think
I think we're frankly good. And frankly, like, not to rush everything along, but we are on a dying battery situation. So thank you so much for listening. Maybe we'll be back next week, but we certainly aren't. Yeah, we certainly aren't going anywhere.
Let us know if we should start recording audiobooks.
Yeah, totally weigh in on the Marco versus Devin.
Yeah.
Okay, bye everyone. Thank you.
Oh, girl.
I gotta hurry,
she's
bestie.
About to die. Oh, shit.